Hey, everybody, welcome back. Today I have on Joe Ferguson, who has been on before demonstrating Clumio. With the coronavirus outbreak, many companies are rapidly transforming their business and adopting SaaS technologies to help them combat the challenges that they're facing in this new world order. Clumio is a born-in-the-cloud SaaS company that provides data protection. And so I've got Joe Ferguson here to talk about the importance of SaaS and get an update on what Clumio is doing to address the challenges in this market today. Joe, welcome back.
Thanks, Chris. How are you?
I'm awesome.
Excellent.
So first off, I just want to ask you, how are you doing? How are you and your family doing during these times with, coronavirus and all that? Everybody healthy, wealthy, and well?
Yeah, actually, thanks for asking. Generally, yeah, we're doing as best as we can in this time. I think it's certainly presents a lot of interesting challenges, but
you enjoying your time at home?
I joke that in some ways I'm one of the most well-equipped people to be living in my house.
No, I'm the most well-equipped. We can fight over that designation.
We are, yeah. Well, we share similar rooms that we do these things in, so
we both have guitars in the background.
Yeah, it's listening to what you were just saying was interesting. When you think about not because of COVID that businesses are changing, I think what it's doing though is highlighting something that's already happening, and it's putting a magnifying glass on it. And I think a lot of the people historically who have been already thinking down this path and understand the value of SaaS and what it does to their organizations were already sort of well on their way. And I think what it's just doing more than anything else is promoting an idea that has already been, accelerating with a lot of momentum because of the value that it brings.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's interesting you say that, because one of the things that I keep hearing is that, these companies are, moving the cloud rapidly, and they have plans, 2-year plans to get to the cloud and get to some of these SaaS apps. And what they're like, we did it in 4 days. So it demonstrates two things, or three things. One is like, maybe it wasn't that hard to do it in the first place, and second of all, like how much, SaaS really at the end of the day is the easy button, right? And, and I think, when you change your risk profile, you can move really, really fast.
Well, yeah, I was going to ask you, so the 4-day example, is that someone who basically moved most of things into SaaS applications rather than refactoring on their own?
Yeah, we had on, for example, we had on Dave Shashevsky from Perdoceo Education, and he talked about how they migrated. The big thing is the work from home. So they shifted their work from home. They shifted to a work from home model, and they had larger plans to deliver that sort of service. But they did it rapidly, and the way they did it was they used AWS to achieve that. So they used AWS's VDI services and things like that, and did a lot of things. They had like some Azure stuff that they did. They're in both clouds, and just the ability for them to shift so dramatically and so rapidly. It's not something that could have been done 3 years ago.
Yeah,
because all these platforms didn't exist 3 years ago, and just the rapid rise of all these things enabled us to survive this event. And he's not the only one. I've heard from several people that just say, like, had we not had the cloud and all these technologies out there, we just would have been done. 3 years ago, we would have been done.
Yeah, interesting, right? And I think. So I always look at cloud as like 4 different adoption strategies, right? You have your lift and shift, which is sort of a simple, inefficient way just to move something up there. And people generally find, some sort of buyer's remorse inside of that, right?
Yes.
You've got a refactoring attempt where you're taking applications and actually rebuilding how they functionally run to take advantage of cloud resources intelligently. And that typically you see where customers are really looking to get a competitive advantage through intelligent design, right? And the applications that they run in that space provide them specific, advantage in their market, right? And then you have the shifts that go into AWS like PaaS, like platform as an offering services, right? Where you've got more generalized structural databases that need to, that it PaaS and SaaS are fairly close and aligned in some ways, right? But from a PaaS perspective, AWS is trying to say, look, we've already built some optimizations around this, so you don't have to do as much work. So it's one step down. And when you move into SaaS, it's really about, we've done all the work for you, and we're delivering a fully optimized architecture on day one that you just sign up and use. And so when what we're seeing is when customers are making decisions around this, if it's an application that is critical to the core business functions to running the business, but it doesn't really provide competitive advantage per se or direct impact on revenue, those are the applications where you run in SaaS, because you don't want to invest money into core competencies to run and manage an infrastructure that is already optimized. And provides no competitive advantage in that sense in the market that you're addressing. Now, SaaS applications can provide competitive advantage in other ways because you're eliminating complexity, you're eliminating, resources you have to manage, you're being able to readdress, your own intellectual mind share into other places in your environment. So they all play in together, but the most specific thing that we see is that a results-based service that's already optimized and will continually stay current for a customer, right? So they never have to worry about that element as well. But additionally, it's this idea that consumed services are as efficient as possible. Because whenever you're buying an infrastructure to manage, right? I mean, rule number one is you always architect for peak. Peak may only happen 5% of the time, but you've bought infrastructural resources that sit idle for the majority of the time. And then you have all the tuning and optimization work that happens inside of that as well. And depreciation, patching, maintenance, everything. But in a SaaS perspective, all the work to design, implement, optimize, deliver that service, it's like you've hired a whole engineering team to specifically focus on the business outcome for you in that case. Right. And they're always monitoring it and they're patching it for you discreetly on the back end. And they're offering you the ability to simply say, pay for only what you use. And so, and we'll scale to meet your need. But if you only need a little bit, you don't need to buy a lot. And if you only need a lot at certain points in time, that's okay, because we'll scale and bill you accordingly, but it's going to be very in line with your utilization.
Right. And it's funny. It's like I look back to the old days of HTML, right? And when the web first emerged, we were all writing our own HTML, hand coding all that HTML, and editing those GIF files, and custom color tables, and all that stuff, and putting our own blink text in there and all that stuff. But the reality, and then after that came some basic apps that kind of did it for you, just kind of like design apps, and that Fusion, and all those from the day, and then it became became more of a service, content management platforms and things like that. So my point is that like initially we all started with the code, and then that code got so far abstracted from us that it became more accessible and more easily usable. And then, people could focus more on the things of like providing the content and all the important things around it, rather than trying to have a core competency in HTML development. And I see cloud kind of like that too now, right? You have that sort of lift and shift model, which is, never very good. And then, we've got several evolutions of it. And I think SaaS is sort of the ultimate evolution of where the cloud's going. And that's why when I talk to people and they're trying, starting their cloud journey, I'm always like, start with your things that are SaaSable first, things that you can roll out into a SaaS-based application, because that's where you're going to get your biggest impact with the least amount of pain, right?
Exactly, and the most immediate gratification.
And we all love immediate gratification.
I mean, we talk about that piece all the time in terms of ransomware, because it's funny if you think about ransomware, just it's an evolutionary process, right? It's been a waged battle for like 25 years now, and it just depends on who's winning the battle. And right now,
Yeah.
it seems to be winning the battle because the sophistication has really taken off, and so the industry's trying
Especially
to,
right now.
and the
Right
industry's
now, it's
trying to
unbelievable.
respond to it.
Yeah.
And so what we're seeing right now is an accelerated need or not, I mean, I wouldn't say demand, right, but desire from customers to solve that in certain areas of their infrastructure. And backup is one of those areas that is more valuable from a target perspective, because the to increase the blast radius of an event like that, right, you have to go for the non-recoverability aspect too. And the joke for us, I mean, but it's true, is where else could you solve that complex of an IT problem in 20 minutes or less? And we can do that, right? So like a customer can take a machine and back it up to Clumio, and they've immediately solved that problem based on our air gap security model, et cetera. But it was as simple as making a decision to do it and enacting upon it. I mean, we had a customer literally call us a few weeks ago and say, hey, we've detected an intrusion in our environment. We have 15 systems that we want to get backed up right now. I know we haven't purchased yet, but can we do this? And we were like, yeah. And it's one of those things where in 20 minutes they were backing them up, and in 4 hours they were complete and they were protected. That's the instant gratification piece. And that same customer can turn around a week from now and said, that was awesome. We want to do 250 more. And they just can roll them in because the service will expand to meet the need, right? So it evolves into this very organic experience for the customer on how they consume it. But the best part is a controlled cost model too, so that they never have to think about a decision that wastes cost inside of it, because they get exactly what they ask for, right? And it's equivalent as far as their consumption and pay, right?
Yeah. Well, another thing I really appreciate about SaaS. Now, when in recent years, we've had sort of the rise of Agile development, and I think that's really transformed how software gets developed and the pace at which software can be developed, right? But I think the next iteration of that is when you apply Agile to more of like a microservices architecture, and you do it as a SaaS platform, right? Because the thing that's interesting about that is you can continuously develop the platform, continuously integrate updates without putting the whole environment at risk, but still moving the ball constantly. And the thing that just never ceases to amaze me is the rapid pace of development for these platforms.
It's amazing.
I've never seen anything like it in the history of technology,
Yeah, so having sold and managed hardware solutions for years, and then now selling my first SaaS application, the one thing that's most evident to me is I believe it seems like there's a 3x gain in development time. Like when you look at maturity of a platform, how it develops features and functions, how it really starts to grow inside of its own build, we're maturing at a 3x pace than anything I've seen from hardware vendors in early growth models, right, that I've already experienced 2 times before. It's just such a accelerated pace. It's amazing to watch. I mean, and you see the customer experience respond to that too, in the sense that you log in one day and, shared encryption's not there. You log in tomorrow and there's a button that says, you want to bring your own encryption key to the service? Sure. Right. Yeah. Bring it in, and makes it simple, guides you through how to do it. And in 3 minutes or less, you've added extra security to your system. Or you log in and we have a new data source that you can protect.
I would imagine though, with that, you have to do that very responsibly, because if you make too many changes, especially interface changes, it can be very confusing and disruptive to people too, right?
Absolutely. But that's the beauty of the micro segmentation of the architecture too, because you can really address smaller, more granular components of things more easily. And it actually is an advantage to us to stay in a rapid development cycle, because the code is more live and active, right? And so but what you need the underlying support system underneath it to be, that robust sort of testing and iterative strategy, right? Where code and everything gets fenced off as well. But we literally, so we just achieved our technical competency with AWS.
Yeah,
And so we're one of the youngest companies to have ever achieved it, right, in that time frame. And I think
so explain what that is. Explain what AWS competency is and what it means to achieve that.
Yeah, so I mean, ultimately, it is that you have shown and demonstrated capabilities within the design of your architecture, and they have a couple different categories, but it's generally around storage, data protection, archiving, and DR as a service. So you have to display competencies across one or multiple of those categories, but do it in a way that is when AWS would look and judge at your architecture, they would essentially call you fully optimized, right? You're really using the breadth of their services in intelligent, responsible ways, creative design, but it's mostly foundational as well, right? I mean, in the sense where they talk about resiliency, reliability characteristics. So it all rolls into the decision criteria. But I think when you're developing in the way that we are, using those native tool sets, and then also, I think the coolest thing about this is that, you take the rapid maturation of these cloud-born SaaS applications, but also the tool sets they're using become more similar as well. And so the idea of sharing ideas or infrastructures between different SaaS elements, right? When you have data pipelines and feeds or API calls that come in, all of this is just shaping the new world order around data flow, transfer, communication. And you have a whole system of application ecosystems that are in this rapid development mode. And I think that's what makes it so challenging when you come from a legacy build and architectures that were really optimized and designed for a whole an infrastructure that was built in an on-premise world. And the idea of ephemeral instances, right, or stateless functions through Lambda and things of that nature to help facilitate scale, performance, right? It's an entirely different mindset because you have a whole different tool set in your box that you can use now. And so I think it's creating an explosion of cool ideas on how to build an architecture on the back end. And I think one of the things that has been really interesting for me with Clumio is their holistic take on what is possible. We have started our journey with data protection, but the idea ultimately is to build this extensible data platform that has, an unlimited use case in a sense, because you're not confined to the restrictions of fixed CPU memory and storage. And so, the whole concept or story that has been discussed over the last couple of years or introduced around meaningful use of secondary data, right, namely backup data, becomes a much more real possibility because in an on-prem world, you've got, again, fixed CPU memory and storage resources, and a lot of these are optimized for large block sequential ingress and egress of data. And now you're asking different functions to be, addressed with it, where you have small block queries, and those are two conflicting I/O patterns that you have to really design around. But when you're in cloud,
and you can tell you used to work for Pure.
We were very I/O focused. But when you build in the cloud model, you can spin up independent resource groups for any task, literally down to a task level. And so it just opens up so many new possibilities. And so we can actually realize the vision of what that secondary use data platform should be, because we aren't constrained by the physical limitations of the platform. So it's almost like, if you think it, you can make it. And we have some pretty smart people thinking about this, which is cool.
Everybody raced to get to the cloud, to get work from home going. But then the next thing was to just shut down spend, preserve cash, right? Because the economy is so uncertain. And so what that's led to is shifting from a more capex centric model to a more opex centric model, right? And I think that plays really, because it's all about cash flow now, right? It's like, because we know that the economy is going to rebound at some point, but it's about managing your cash flow until that happens. So, the ability to utilize SaaS to minimize your upfront spend and spread it out over time, sort of optimizes your cash flow. So I think, that's another really interesting aspect, because you talk about, all the hardware and stuff you have to purchase and having to purchase for max, peak loads and things like that. You buy a lot up front in a CapEx model, but in an OpEx sort of model like this, that SaaS provides, you're spreading those payments out, right? And so that seems really optimized for what's happening right now.
Yeah, and I think the businesses that could, I mean, no pun intended, but capitalize on OpEx spend, in the past have been early SaaS adopters, right? And I think what's interesting is you see CapEx heavy organizations being forced to change a model out of necessity now. And so it's no longer this is a favored or preferred way to do business. We're struggling to actually do this. So we have to shift into the CapEx model. And then so SaaS has the ability to step in and be that, that sort of absolute, pay for what you consume and only that and no more. And it lends itself to that perfect model.
So Joe, so the last time we talked, I think it was when you were launching your product at VMworld. I got to imagine, considering we talked about the rapid pace of change and development, that a lot has happened since then. I mean, can you give me the highlights?
Sure. Yeah.
Really quick.
Yeah. I mean, there's sort of two development cycles inside of a SaaS application, and one is more around customer-facing use cases, and then there's a sort of a secondary goal of just maturing the underpinnings of the product itself, right, or the delivery of the service. And so, things from a customer-facing, and we talked about, we spent 3 years really building the right back-end architecture, and a lot of our focus would be now expanding the sources that we can protect and bring into the fold. And so we pivoted fairly quickly after the VMware and VMC announcements of support, and even having done so well at VMworld last year, we went straight into focusing on AWS native IaaS workloads, and within 3 months had the ability essentially at that point to then support the data protection and backing up of EBS volumes inside of AWS. The natural progression for us inside of that space is to then move into RDS, right, and start attacking PaaS inside of AWS, right? The next natural move for us too is to move into Microsoft Azure, into the next public cloud, and we've talked for a while about adding in SaaS applications, and so we've been working on that. Obvious ones inside of that are O365 is a very common one, right? And we're so inside of that space, you'll see us continue to expand what we are protecting, and throughout the course of this year, right, it will continue to grow. But functionally within the platform itself, we've done some really cool things as well. We released a concept around restoring data from cloud to back onto on-prem infrastructures, which we refer to as reverse change block tracking. And actually, that might not be our formal logo for it. That was the internal name. I don't know where marketing ended up on this one, but essentially what we do,
Joe's own marketing.
One of the biggest challenges, or when people raise any resistance to backing up from on-prem into cloud, one of the main arguments is well, how long is it going to take me to restore data? And there's a matter of physics involved there, but when you can intelligently overcome physical limitations, that gives you competitive advantage. And so what we did essentially is dynamically inject a method where if a VM, let's say you have a 5 terabyte VM and it goes corrupt, it's still in inventory, you haven't deleted it yet, but it's not powering on, it's just dead. You request a full restore of that 5 terabyte VM. We'll intelligently check if you have a VAI storage, integrated storage array. We'll ask VMware to say, "Hey, storage array, give us a snapshot of that VM." We're going to check against it. If it's less than 20% changed, we'll actually just do a compare versus the last differential backup that we have, and just restore.
So you're just kind of binary diffing it.
I'm sorry.
You're just doing like a binary diff and replacing what's
Yeah.
not there?
So the end user
Yeah.
says, I need 5 terabytes back. But we look at the situation and they don't even have to request it, but we can say, hey, there's a better way to bring your data back, right? And so we know a way where we could restore that 5 terabyte VM in 5 to 10 minutes because we only had to
Oh,
send
wow, that's
50 gigs
interesting.
of data, even though you requested 5 terabytes. So adding stuff like that into the service makes it more realistic for people with lower bandwidth links to utilize the service, right? People who don't
Hmm.
necessarily say, they don't have multi 10 gig links that they can provide and offer to the service. So our whole
Right.
goal around, intelligent implementation is to use what the customer gives us as efficiently and responsibly as possible. And so that's like a really cool example of what we could do there.
Yeah.
But adding, bring your own encryption key. So we already have kind of an envelope encryption key system, but now a customer can literally add their own key into the service. We've implemented intelligent bandwidth throttling for on-prem backups. So if you have multiple cloud connectors deployed across a vCenter, you can set a limit and the service intelligently will manage the bandwidth across all your cloud connectors. So you don't have any endpoint specifications around and trying to manage, because if you start putting that at the endpoint itself, and then you have 10 of them, now you've got complexity. So we made it easier where you could just set it and then manage the service, manage all of them from one spot. Everything continues to develop in that sense, and so when you can start deploying 3 to 4 major data sources throughout the course of a year, that's really rapid development, right? Or whether
Yeah.
you're doing geographic shifts. We just launched into Canada yesterday. We understood that took us 3 weeks to build a control plane and a data plane in a new country, right? So talk
Yeah.
about rapid development. We have some customers right now that are pushing us around global expansion just
Yeah.
to solve for their business itself. And that's
Yeah.
a really strong statement when you can say, hey, if you want to align with us, right, we can be up and running in your country in a very quick time, right?
Yeah.
Understanding maybe there's not some weird barring incident, but but again, it just lends itself to being able to really rapidly grow and scale, just not only internal to one segment of the service, but just overall, right, across the
Yeah.
board. Yeah.
I think one of the things that you said is really interesting to me, and I think with your sort of rapid development, like the SaaS piece, like backing up other SaaS applications, seems like a particularly interesting sweet spot for you guys. And I think at the rate you develop things, the ability to integrate new SaaS platforms, I could see that picking up pace significantly.
It's an interesting part of the conversation, and I think it's one of those that when you the maturity of an idea, right, in IT takes some time, and I think the idea that your SaaS application is protecting your data for you in a relevant and compliant way with your own organization's organization's requirements is not a given. And when you investigate more and more, right, it really comes down to limited functionality inside of what the protection mechanisms are, and oftentimes limited timeframes as well. And I think when you talk about true data protection, you really need granularity, you need flexibility, right?
Yeah.
And you need to be able to exert some controls that are pertinent to your business model. I had an interesting customer conversation once where they said, 50% of their SaaS applications that they would want to use don't even ever make it in the door because they can't be compliant and the SaaS builder can't adjust to be compliant. So you need to be flexible in how you can respond to customer needs. But ultimately, to back up that data in a secure gold copy and give you flexibility and ease of use on how you can restore. You don't have to open a support ticket with the SaaS company to request a restore, and with an SLA of 5-7 days or whatnot, right? I think there's certainly different criticality levels and maybe different response levels, but certainly not putting the control back in your own hands to repair things that are broken in your time, not anybody else's time.
Well, and I think that's an important point because I don't think a lot of people realize that when they use a SaaS application, the SLAs around some of those things are really outside the bounds of what a company would typically accept,
Yeah. And I think, I mean, but even to the point where and I think that it's one of those things, again, as the idea matures, it's just becoming more and more well known that most of these SaaS applications will put in the print of their agreements. We do recommend that you use a third party to back up this data beyond the protection that we give. And typically, what's interesting with what Clumio does is we're saying that story all the time, right? Even as it relates to native public cloud, where snapshots has been this accepted norm, because backup and recovery, the people who understand backup and recovery didn't always necessarily shift with the cloud teams. And so it's a re-education process around really, and the interesting thing is CIOs know this, right? And so, because they've lived it for 20 years, right? And what they're seeing is now more scattered approaches around consolidation of knowing where your data is, what it's doing, and how we're protecting it. Are we compliant? And so we're sort of coming to, that conversation and saying this makes a lot of sense because you're pulling everything back into a manageable thing, not just from a view perspective, but actually like a single engine that's driving compliance across your organization, across the whole hybrid architecture. And that's really the value of where Clumio comes in, is that we can protect your on-prem data as you move into cloud. We have you covered there too. And by the way, you're already adopting 5, 10, oftentimes hundreds of SaaS applications, right? And so that's a journey to get some scope there for us. But ultimately, we'll focus on the most used, the most critical ones first, and give customers an option to have control, influence, understanding security, right? Their own hands and controls of the data. That's important.
Yeah. No, that's awesome, man. It sounds really interesting, and I can't wait to see what you guys develop next. And I'll tell you something. One of the reasons why I think it's so interesting to talk to you is there seems to be a lot of interest from the folks who watch this channel, because whenever there's a video up about Clumio, it is so heavily watched. It's astounding, and I don't know entirely what drives all that, but it certainly says something, right? So give them what they want, right? More Clumio content.
Clumio. It's what we all want. So, more Clumio.
More Clumio content, right? But Joe, I really appreciate you coming on, and I appreciate you spending a little time and giving us an update. And we'll have to check back in. Probably not quite as long as we did the last time, because you developed so quickly. So we got to keep checking in a little.
Yeah, a little tighter cadence on this. But thank you for supporting us in by allowing us the space to talk about it. And certainly we always appreciate people who are really intelligent in this space, kind of directing these conversations. And so it's always great to talk with you as well.
Well, thank you.
I like your channel. It's good stuff.
Thank you. So if you like what you saw and heard, please click that like button, hit subscribe, and if you want to get notifications when I post new content, hit that bell icon and you will get notifications on these posts. And I will see you in the next video.